The freight train's whistle pierced the Colorado night like a scream of warning as Clara Beaumont pressed herself against the splintered wooden slats of the cattle car. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from the train's violent rocking, but from the boots thundering across the roof above her head. The railroad guards had found her trail. "She's got to be in one of these cars," a gruff voice shouted over the clatter of wheels on steel. "Boss wants her found before we hit Broken Ridge." Clara's fingers trembled as she clutched the small leather satchel containing everything she owned, a change of clothes, her mother's silver thimble, and the letters from Frederick Vaughn that had become her lifeline over the past 6 months. At 26, she was already considered past marriageable age in Boston. But Frederick had seen something in her careful penmanship and honest descriptions of life at St. Catherine's Orphanage. His proposal had been her escape from a future of endless servitude. Now crouched in the suffocating darkness with the stench of hay and livestock filling her nostrils, Clara wondered if she'd traded one prison for another. Heavy footsteps moved along the roof directly above her. A lantern beam swept through the gaps in the siding, missing her by inches. Clara held her breath, remembering Sister Margaret's lesson from years ago. When cornered, child stillness can be your salvation. The old nun had taught her that trick after Clara had avoided a beating from the older girls by feigning unconsciousness. It had saved her then, and it might save her now. The car door exploded open with a screech of rusted metal. Yellow light flooded the cramped space as 2 guards stepped inside, their rifles gleaming in the lantern glow. "Check behind every sack," the first guard ordered. "She's got money hidden somewhere, and the boss wants it found." Clara's mind raced. What money she'd spent her last coins on the train ticket to Denver, only to discover that reaching Broken Ridge required an additional $50 she didn't have. That's when she'd made the desperate decision to stow away. "You wait," the second guard said, his voice carrying a cruel edge. "Look at this." The lantern beam swept toward Clara's hiding place behind a stack of grain sacks. She had perhaps 3 seconds before they discovered her. Drawing on every survival instinct she'd learned in 26 years of hardship, Clara let her body go completely limp, rolled her eyes back, and allowed her mouth to fall open. The technique she'd perfected at the orphanage, mimicking the epileptic fits she'd witnessed, had saved her from countless punishments. "Jesus," the first guard muttered, his light finding her seemingly unconscious form. "She's passed out cold. Dead, breathing but barely. Poor thing probably hasn't eaten in days." The guard's voice softened slightly. "We can't have corpses on the manifest. Boss ain't gonna like this. He was real specific about wanting her conscious." "Then maybe he shouldn't have cut off her food supply. Leave her be, we'll sort it out at Broken Ridge." The door slammed shut, plunging Clara back into darkness. She forced herself to remain motionless until their voices faded, then carefully opened her eyes. Through a gap in the siding, she could see the first pale light of dawn painting the mountains ahead. The train was slowing, which meant they were approaching her destination. But the guard's conversation had chilled her to the bone. Someone had been expecting her arrival, someone who knew about money she supposedly possessed. The letters from Frederick had mentioned nothing about money, only his desire for a wife who could help him build a life in the frontier town of Broken Ridge. As Clara prepared to leap from the moving train, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was jumping into a trap that had been set long before she'd ever heard of Frederick Vaughn. The carefully worded letters, the sudden urgency in his final correspondence, the guard's orders to find her, it all pointed to a deception she was only beginning to understand. The train rounded a bend, and Clara caught her first glimpse of Broken Ridge. The town huddled in the valley, like a collection of weathered bones, surrounded by the harsh beauty of the Colorado wilderness. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could see people moving along the dusty streets, unaware that a conspiracy was about to unfold in their midst. Clara gathered her courage and her meager possessions, then squeezed through the loose board she'd discovered during her journey. The ground rushed past in a blur of rocks and scrub brush, and she realized with growing alarm that the train wasn't slowing as much as she'd hoped. When she finally jumped, the impact sent her tumbling across the rocky ground, her skirts tearing and her hands scraping against the sharp stones. Pain shot through her ankle as she struggled to her feet, but she forced herself to keep moving. Behind her, she could hear the train whistle announcing its arrival at the station. Soon the guards would discover her escape and the hunt would begin in earnest. As Clara limped toward the town, she touched the small sketch pad hidden in her satchel, a habit she'd developed to calm her nerves by drawing what she saw. Sister Margaret had encouraged her artistic pursuits, saying that observing details could save her life someday. Now Clara realized the old nun might have been preparing her for something more than a simple life of service. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley. Clara Beaumont walked toward Broken Ridge, with her head held high, unaware that she was about to discover her real name, her true heritage, and the dangerous conspiracy that had already claimed one life and threatened to destroy everything she might come to love. The morning sun cast long shadows across Broken Ridge's main street as Clara approached the town proper, her torn dress and disheveled appearance drawing curious stares from early risers. The settlement was larger than she'd expected, with substantial buildings that spoke of real prosperity. A two-story bank, a well-appointed hotel, and several saloons that looked more like gentlemen's clubs than frontier watering holes. Clara paused outside Peterson's general store, studying her reflection in the window. Her auburn hair had escaped its pins during the fall from the train, and dirt streaked her pale cheeks. She looked like what she was, a desperate woman with nowhere else to go. "You're not from around here," a voice said behind her. Clara turned to find a nervous-looking man in his 50s, his thinning hair carefully combed despite the early hour. His vest bore the stains of recent meals, and his eyes held the wary look of someone who'd seen too much trouble. "I'm looking for Frederick Vaughn," Clara said carefully. "I understand he owns a business in town." The man's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "I'm Peterson. I run this store, and I worked with Frederick sometimes." He paused, studying her face. "Are you the mail-order bride he was expecting?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm sorry, miss, but Frederick Vaughn is dead. Died 3 days ago in what they're calling a hunting accident." Peterson's voice carried genuine sadness. "Terrible thing. He was one of the few honest men in this town." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "Dead. But that's impossible. I received a letter from him just last week." "What did you say your name was?" Peterson asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Clara Beaumont. Then you need to know something important. Frederick talked about you, often said you were coming to marry him. But he also said something else, that bringing you here would right an old wrong. I didn't understand what he meant at the time." Before Clara could respond, the store's bell chimed and a well-dressed man entered. He was perhaps 45, with silver-streaked hair and expensive clothing that marked him as someone of importance. His pale blue eyes fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Miss Beaumont, I presume." His voice was smooth and cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I'm Victor Langley, Frederick's business partner. I've been expecting you." Clara's memory flashed to the conversation she'd overheard near the train station. This had to be the man the guards had called their boss. "Mr. Langley," she said, forcing herself to remain calm. "I'm sorry for your loss." Yes, well, Frederick was always taking risks. These frontier towns can be dangerous for men who don't understand the local customs. Victor's smile never reached his eyes. "But I'm sure you're more concerned with practical matters. Your future, your situation." "I'm not sure what you mean. You've traveled a great distance to marry a man who is no longer alive. That leaves you rather stranded, doesn't it?" Victor's tone was sympathetic, but Clara detected something calculating beneath the surface. "Fortunately, I may be able to help." Peterson cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Beaumont, perhaps you'd like to visit Frederick's grave. Pay your respects." "That's very kind." Clara replied, grateful for the interruption. Mr. Langley, perhaps we could speak later. Of course. But don't delay too long. There are arrangements that need to be made, and time is pressing. Victor tipped his hat and left, but not before giving Clara a look that made her feel like prey being studied by a predator. After the door closed, Peterson leaned across the counter. Miss Beaumont, I don't know what Frederick told you in his letters, but you need to be careful around Victor Langley. He's not the man he appears to be. What do you mean? Frederick was investigating some irregularities in the town's business dealings. He suspected someone was cheating settlers out of their land and selling weapons to raiders. He never said who, but... Peterson glanced toward the door. He died right after he told me he'd found proof. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. You think he was murdered? I think he was getting too close to the truth. And now that you're here, you might be in danger too. But I'm just a seamstress from Boston. I don't know anything about land deals or weapons. That's not what Frederick believed. He said you had a connection to this area that went back further than you knew. He said your family. Peterson stopped abruptly as the bell chimed again. An older Mexican woman entered, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore simple black clothing, and her eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from surviving hardship. Mr. Peterson, she said, her English accented but clear. I need supplies for the hotel kitchen. Of course, Mrs. Vasquez. This is Miss Beaumont, Frederick's intended. Elena Vasquez's eyes widened with recognition and sympathy. Ah, pobrecita. I heard about Frederick. Such a good man. She studied Clara's face carefully. You have his eyes, you know. I'm sorry. Frederick showed me a picture once. Said it was of someone very important to him. You look just like her. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. He said you were coming home. Clara felt a strange stirring in her chest. Home. But I've never been to Colorado before. Maybe not in this life, but... Elena shrugged. Frederick believed in connections that run deeper than memory. He said bringing you here would heal old wounds. Before Clara could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the window. Victor Langley was returning, accompanied by several rough-looking men, whose appearance suggested they were more comfortable with violence than commerce. Mrs. Vasquez, Peterson said urgently, take Miss Beaumont out the back way. But it was too late. Victor pushed through the front door, his earlier facade of politeness completely gone. Miss Beaumont, I'm afraid our conversation can't wait. There are urgent matters that require your attention. What kind of matters? Legal matters. It seems Frederick left some debts behind, and as his intended bride, you may be responsible for them. Victor's tone was reasonable, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. Fortunately, I'm prepared to help you resolve these issues. Clara looked at the armed men flanking Victor and realized she was trapped. What kind of help? Employment. I own the Silver Dollar Saloon, and I'm always in need of reliable help. You could work there, earn your keep, and gradually pay off Frederick's obligations. Victor's eyes glittered with something that might have been greed or might have been satisfaction. It's quite respectable work serving drinks, keeping the books, maintaining order among the clientele. And if I refuse, then you're free to leave, of course. But I should warn you that word of your arrival has already spread through town. There are men here who see an unprotected woman as an opportunity. Victor's grip on her elbow tightened slightly. At least under my roof, you'll be safe. Clara glanced at Peterson and Elena, both of whom were watching her with expressions of helpless sympathy. She had no money, no connections, and no legal protection. Victor's offer was a trap, but it might be her only chance to discover what had really happened to Frederick. I suppose I don't have much choice, she said quietly. Excellent. Victor's smile was triumphant. My men will escort you to the Silver Dollar. You'll start work this evening." As Clara was led away, she caught Elena's eye. The older woman mouthed a single word, "Careful." Clara nodded slightly, her mind already working on a plan. She'd survived 26 years of uncertainty at St. Catherine's Orphanage, and she would survive this too. But first, she needed to understand what Frederick had discovered, what Victor Langley really wanted, and why a penniless orphan from Boston had become the center of a conspiracy that reached far beyond the borders of Broken Ridge. The Silver Dollar loomed ahead, its ornate facade hiding secrets that would soon shatter everything Clara thought she knew about her past and her future. But as she walked toward her uncertain fate, she touched the small sketch pad in her satchel and remembered Sister Margaret's words, "Family will find you when you need them most." Perhaps the old nun had been preparing her for this moment all along. The Silver Dollar was more opulent than any saloon Clara had ever imagined, with polished mahogany crystal chandeliers and artwork that belonged in a city establishment. The afternoon crowd was well-dressed and well-armed, their conversations conducted in the low tones of men discussing serious business. Victor led Clara to a corner table where a plate of food waited the first real meal she'd seen in 2 days. "I trust you'll find the accommodations adequate," he said, pouring himself whiskey from a cut glass decanter. "Your room is upstairs. Nothing fancy but private. Mr. Langley, I appreciate your offer, but I need to understand what's expected of me." Clara kept her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. "You mentioned Frederick's debts, but I don't see how I could be responsible for them." "Ah, but you see there's more to your situation than you realize." Victor's pale eyes studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. "Tell me, Miss Beaumont, what do you know about your parents?" The question caught Clara off guard. "My parents died when I was very young. I was raised at St. Catherine's Orphanage. And before that, any family history documents memories from your early childhood." Clara frowned, uncertain where this was leading. "I remember a woman with dark hair who used to sing to me. Sister Margaret said she was probably my mother. But I don't see what this has to do with Frederick." "Sister Margaret," Victor repeated, making a note in a leather journal. "Interesting name. Tell me, did this Sister Margaret ever mention anything about your surname? Beaumont is French, isn't it?" "I suppose so. But Mr. Langley, I don't understand why you're asking these questions." Victor's smile was cold. "Because, my dear, I have reason to believe you're not who you think you are. Frederick brought you here for a very specific purpose. And now that he's dead, that purpose falls to me." Before Clara could respond, the saloon's doors burst open. A tall man with long black hair and bronze skin strode in his dark eyes, scanning the room until they found Clara. Even in the dim light, she could see the controlled fury in his expression. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Victor's men immediately reached for their weapons, but the newcomer moved with fluid grace, disarming the nearest gunman before anyone could react. Clara recognized him from the train, the chained prisoner who had helped her escape from the guards. "Takoda," Victor said, his voice tight with anger. "You're supposed to be in jail." "I was released an hour ago." Seems the witnesses against me suddenly remembered seeing the real horse thieves. Takoda's eyes never left Clara. Funny how people's memories improve when the right pressure is applied. "What do you want?" "The woman. She doesn't belong here." Victor laughed. "Miss Beaumont is here of her own free will. She's working for me now, paying off her late fiancé's debts." Frederick Vaughn had no debts, Takoda said flatly. "He was one of the most honest men I've ever known." "Then you didn't know him as well as you thought." Takoda stepped closer, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "I knew him well enough to know he was murdered. Just like I know you're planning to murder her." The saloon fell silent. Every eye was on the confrontation, and Clara could feel the tension ratcheting higher with each passing second. That's quite an accusation. Victor said, his voice dangerously quiet. Do you have proof? I have this. Takoda pulled a folded paper from his shirt. A letter Frederick wrote to the territorial marshal describing your illegal activities and naming you as the leader of a conspiracy to defraud settlers and start a war with the Lakota. Clara's blood ran cold. Victor had been planning to use her somehow, but she was only now beginning to understand the scope of his operation, even if that letter is genuine. Victor said it died with Frederick. No one will believe the word of a convicted horse thief over a respected businessman. Maybe not, but they might believe her. Takoda's eyes fixed on Clara, especially when she learns who she really is. What do you mean? Clara asked. Your name isn't Clara Beaumont. It's Clara Morgan. Your parents didn't die in some accident, they were murdered. And the man responsible is sitting right across from you. Victor's composure cracked for just a moment, but it was enough. Clara saw the flash of panic in his eyes before he regained control. You're obviously delusional, Victor said. The frontier sun has affected your judgment. Well, has it then explained why you've been searching for Clara Morgan for the past 26 years? Explain why you hired men to intercept her letters, forge correspondence from Frederick, and lure her here under false pretenses. Clara felt the world spinning around her. You wrote Frederick's letters? Some of them, Takoda continued. Victor took over the correspondence after Frederick discovered the truth about your identity. He needed you to come willingly so he could claim legal guardianship of your inheritance. What inheritance? The Morgan Railroad fortune. $3 million that should have been yours, but that Victor stole when he murdered your parents. Victor's mask finally slipped completely. Enough, he shouted, drawing his gun. You've said too much, Indian. But Takoda was already moving. He flipped the nearest table, sending glasses and bottles crashing to the floor as he rolled behind the makeshift barrier. Victor's shot went wide, embedding itself in the wall above Clara's head. The saloon erupted into chaos. Men dove for cover as more shots rang out. Clara found herself pressed against the bar, her heart hammering as she tried to process what she'd just learned. Clara, Takoda called out. The back door now. But Victor's men were already moving to block her escape. Clara looked around desperately for another option and spotted the staircase leading to the upper floor. If she could reach her room, she might be able to climb out the window. She made her break running for the stairs as bullets whistled past her head. Behind her, she could hear Takoda fighting with desperate fury, using every piece of furniture in the saloon as a weapon. Clara reached the second floor and ran for her room, slamming the door behind her. The window was narrow, but she managed to squeeze through it onto the roof of the building next door. From there, she could see the entire town spread out below her, including the cemetery where Frederick was buried. If Takoda was telling the truth, then Frederick had died trying to protect her. The least she could do was find out what he discovered and whether she really was the missing heiress Victor had been hunting for so long. Clara made her way across the rooftops using skills she'd learned as a child when she'd explored every inch of the orphanage to avoid punishment. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the fight continuing in the saloon, but she forced herself to focus on the task ahead. She had to reach the cemetery, find Frederick's grave, and discover the truth about her past. Only then could she decide what to do with the knowledge that might save her life or get her killed. The cemetery lay on a hill overlooking Broken Ridge, its weathered headstones casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. Clara had made her way there by keeping to the back alleys and side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Victor's men might be searching for her. Frederick's grave was marked by a simple wooden cross, the earth, still fresh from recent burial. Clara knelt beside it, touching the rough wood and trying to imagine the man who had tried to protect her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry you died because of me. He didn't die because of you, a voice said behind her. He died because he was a good man who couldn't stand by while innocent people were hurt. Clara spun around to find Elena Vasquez approaching, her face grave with concern. In her hands was a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Vasquez, how did you know I was here?" "I've been watching the silver dollar since you were taken there. When I saw you escape across the rooftops, I knew you'd come here eventually." Elena sat down beside Clara, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are things you need to know, things Frederick discovered before he died. Takoda said my name was Clara Morgan, that my parents were murdered. He was telling the truth. Frederick spent months investigating your background, following leads that took him from Boston to San Francisco to Denver. He uncovered a conspiracy that goes back 26 years. Elena unwrapped the bundle to reveal a collection of documents, photographs, and letters. Frederick hid these before he died, knowing that Victor would try to destroy any evidence of his crimes. Clara picked up the first document, a birth certificate for Clara Morgan, born in San Francisco on April 15, 1848, to Catherine Morgan and James Morgan. The second was a marriage certificate showing that Catherine Morgan had married Victor Langley 2 years after James Morgan's death. "My father died when I was a baby. Your real father, James Morgan, died in what Victor claimed was a railroad accident. But Frederick found evidence that the accident was staged." Elena's voice grew heavy with sadness. "Victor murdered your father to gain control of the Morgan Railroad fortune, then married your mother to make it legal." Clara stared at the documents, her hands shaking. "And my mother—" "Victor poisoned her slowly over the course of several months. She grew weaker after you were born, and he convinced everyone it was complications from childbirth. But she knew what he was doing." Elena handed Clara a letter written in a woman's careful handwriting. "Your mother wrote this the night before she died. She knew she was running out of time." Clara read the letter with growing horror. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then Victor has succeeded in his plan to destroy our family. He has murdered your father and is slowly killing me. But I have managed to hide you from his reach. A woman I trust has promised to take you far from here, where Victor will never find you. Know that you are loved beyond measure, and that your parents died trying to protect you from a man who sees people as nothing more than obstacles to his ambition. Sister Margaret." Clara whispered, understanding flooding through her. "She's the one who took me from Victor's house. She saved your life that night. But Victor has been searching for you ever since, using his wealth and connections to track down every lead." Clara looked at the other documents in the bundle, financial records showing Victor's systematic theft of the Morgan fortune correspondence, with corrupt officials and detailed plans for illegal activities across the territory. Frederick discovered all of this. He was a good detective, and he cared about justice. But he also cared about you. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "He said you reminded him of your mother, brave, intelligent, and determined to do what was right. But how did he find me? He's been following Victor's search for years, always staying one step behind. When Victor's men started making inquiries at Boston orphanages, Frederick knew you were close to being found. He wrote to you first, hoping to warn you and bring you to safety." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "But Victor intercepted the correspondence. Not all of it. Frederick's early letters were genuine. He really did want to marry you, to give you the life your parents had dreamed of. But when Victor discovered the connection, he took over the correspondence and used it to lure you here." "Why, if Victor wanted to kill me, why bring me here at all?" Elena hesitated, then pulled out the final document in the bundle. "Because he needs you alive long enough to sign this." Clara looked at the paper, a legal document transferring all rights to the Morgan estate to Victor Langley in exchange for a modest settlement. "If I sign this, I'm officially giving up my inheritance. Us more than that. You're legitimizing his claim to everything he's stolen. With your signature, he becomes the legal heir to the Morgan fortune, and all of his crimes become business transactions. And if I refuse, then he'll kill you and forge your signature. but he'd rather have you cooperate so he can use you as a witness to support his version of events. Clara studied the documents, her mind racing. If she was really Clara Morgan, then she was one of the wealthiest women in America. But wealth meant nothing if she couldn't live long enough to claim it. Mrs. Vasquez, how do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just another trap? Elena smiled sadly. Because Frederick left you this. She pulled out a small silver locket tarnished with age, but still beautiful. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman with Clara's eyes and smile. Your mother, Elena said simply. Frederick found it in Victor's private safe, along with other items he'd stolen from your family. He wanted you to have it to remember who you really are. Clara fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of her mother's love and the responsibility of her inheritance. She was no longer just Clara Beaumont, the orphaned seamstress. She was Clara Morgan, daughter of murdered parents and rightful heir to a fortune built on justice and compassion. What do I do now? You survive, Elena said. You find a way to expose Victor's crimes and reclaim what's rightfully yours. Frederick believed you were strong enough to finish what he started. But I'm just one person. Victor has money-power connections. You have something he doesn't. You have the truth. And you have allies he doesn't know about. Before Clara could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Victor's men had found their trail. Go, Elena said urgently. Head for the hills north of town. There's an old mining camp about 5 miles out. You'll be safe there. What about you? I'll be fine. Victor needs me alive. I know too much about his household operations. Elena pressed a small bundle of supplies into Clara's hands. But you need to disappear until you can figure out how to fight back. Clara looked at the documents one more time, memorizing the details that would help her reclaim her identity. Then she kissed Elena's cheek and ran for the tree line, her heart pounding with the knowledge that she was no longer running from her past. She was running toward her future. Behind her, she could hear Victor's men searching the cemetery, their voices growing more frustrated as they found no trace of their quarry. But Clara was already thinking ahead, planning her next move in a game that had been 26 years in the making. She was Clara Morgan, and she was going to make Victor Langley pay for every life he destroyed in his quest for power and wealth. The abandoned mining camp was a collection of rotting buildings and rusted equipment, hidden in a valley that had been stripped bare by 20 years of intensive excavation. Clara had been there for 2 days, living on the supplies Elena had given her, and trying to formulate a plan to expose Victor's crimes. She'd used the time to practice her sketching, documenting everything she'd learned about Victor's conspiracy. The habit of recording details had become even more important, now that she understood the scope of what she was facing. On the 3rd morning, Clara woke to find she wasn't alone. Takoda sat by the remnants of a campfire, his face painted with traditional Lakota designs that made him look like a warrior from another time. How did you find me? Clara asked. Elena told me where to look. She's worried about you. Is she safe? For now. Victor suspects she helped you escape, but he can't prove anything. And he needs her to maintain his cover as a respectable businessman. Clara studied Takoda's face, noting the fresh cuts and bruises that told of hard fighting. What happened at the Silver Dollar? I got away, but barely. Victor's men are better trained than I expected. Takoda's expression grew grim. They're not just hired guns, they're military men. Confederate veterans who've been working for Victor for years. How many? At least 20, maybe more. They've been arriving in town over the past few weeks preparing for something big. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of something? A war. Victor's been planning to provoke a conflict between the Lakota and the white settlers. He wants to use the resulting chaos to seize control of the territorial government. How do you know all this? Because I've been investigating Victor's activities for months. Frederick asked me to help him gather evidence, and I agreed. because I've seen what Victor's weapons have done to my people." Takoda pulled out a map marked with red X's. "These are the sites of recent attacks on Lakota villages. Every one of them was carried out with weapons that Victor sold to Mexican raiders. He's selling weapons to both sides. He's creating the conflict himself. The Mexican raiders attack Lakota villages, then Victor's men dress up as Lakota warriors and attack white settlements. Each side thinks the other started the war." Clara stared at the map, understanding the full scope of Victor's plan. And when the territorial government sends in the cavalry, Victor will be there to supply them with weapons, ammunition, and intelligence. He'll make a fortune from the war and then use his profits to buy political influence. But why does he need me? Because the Morgan Railroad fortune is the key to everything. With $3 million, Victor can buy governors, judges, and federal officials. He can expand his operations across the entire western frontier. Clara touched the locket at her throat, thinking of her parents and the dreams they'd had for the future. "Then we have to stop him. Clara, this isn't your fight. You could take the documents Elena gave you and disappear. Change your name, go back east, live quietly, somewhere Victor will never find you. And let him continue killing innocent people. Let him profit from the murder of my parents." Clara's voice grew stronger. "No. I'm Clara Morgan, and I'm going to reclaim what's mine." Takoda smiled for the first time since she'd met him. "Then you'll need to know more about what you're up against." Over the next several hours, Takoda explained the full scope of Victor's conspiracy. The man wasn't just a criminal, he was the leader of a network of former Confederate officers who were trying to destabilize the territorial government and create their own power base in the West. "The plan is simple but effective," Takoda said. "Create chaos, then profit from the solution. Victor provides the weapons that start the conflicts, then gets paid to help end them." But surely someone in the government must suspect what's happening. Victor has allies in the territorial legislature, the federal bureaucracy, and the military. The few honest officials who've tried to investigate have either been bought off or eliminated. Clara felt a wave of despair. "Then how can we possibly stop him?" "By exposing him publicly. Victor's power depends on secrecy and misdirection. If we can force him to act openly, his allies will abandon him to save themselves." "How?" "By using you as bait. Victor needs you alive to sign the inheritance papers, but he also needs you to believe you have no choice. If we can make him reveal his true plans in front of witnesses..." "That's suicide. He's already tried to kill me once." "Not if we're careful, and not if we have help." Takoda gestured toward the hills surrounding the camp. "My people have been watching Victor's movements for months. They're ready to act when the time is right." Clara looked toward the hills where she could now see the silhouettes of Lakota warriors positioned on the ridges. "How many?" "Enough. But we need to move quickly. Victor's planning his final attack for tomorrow night when the moon is dark and his men can move without being seen. Final attack. A massacre designed to look like a Lakota uprising. He's going to hit every major settlement in the territory simultaneously, then claim he barely escaped with his life." Clara's blood ran cold. "How many people will die?" "Hundreds. Maybe thousands. And when it's over, Victor will be the hero who survived the savage attack. The territorial government will give him emergency powers to deal with the Indian crisis. We have to warn them." "We will. But first, we need to get you back to town. Victor's men have been searching for you everywhere, and he's getting desperate. If you don't show up soon, he might accelerate his timeline." Clara looked at the documents Elena had given her then, at the map showing Victor's planned attacks. She was one woman against a conspiracy that had been 26 years in the making. But she was also Clara Morgan, daughter of people who had believed in justice and died defending it. "I'm ready," she said finally. "Are you sure once we go back to town, there's no guarantee we'll be able to protect you?" "I'm sure. But I need to know more about your people's plan." If we're going to stop Victor, we need to coordinate our efforts. Takoda nodded his respect for her growing. Chief Wikasa, my father has been preparing for this moment for months. We have warriors positioned around every settlement Victor plans to attack. When his men move, we'll be ready for them. What about the real Mexican raiders, the ones Victor's been hiring? They're camped about 10 miles south of here waiting for Victor's signal to attack. We've been watching them too. Clara felt a spark of hope. Then we have a chance. We have a chance. But success depends on perfect timing and a lot of luck. As they prepared to leave the mining camp, Clara took one last look at the map, memorizing the locations of the planned attacks. She pulled out her sketch pad and quickly drew a detailed copy, adding notes about timing and troop movements. "What are you doing?" Takoda asked. "Creating evidence. If we survive this, we'll need proof of Victor's plans." Clara's voice was steady despite the fear growing in her chest. "Sister Margaret taught me that details can save lives. I'm hoping she was right." They rode toward Broken Ridge as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Clara had never felt more afraid or more determined. Tomorrow night, she would face the man who had murdered her parents and stolen her inheritance. But she wouldn't face him alone. Behind her, she could see Lakota warriors moving through the hills like ghosts, taking positions for the battle to come. Ahead lay the town, where Victor Langley waited confident in his power and unaware that his carefully constructed conspiracy was about to collapse around him. Clara Morgan was coming home, and she was bringing justice with her. The sun was setting as Clara and Takoda reached the outskirts of Broken Ridge. The town looked peaceful from a distance, but Clara could see the signs of preparation for violence. Too many well-armed men, moving with military precision wagons, loaded with supplies heading toward the hills, and an unusual number of horses tied up outside the Silver Dollar. "Victor's men are mobilizing," Takoda observed. "The attack is definitely planned for tonight. Then we need to move fast." Clara checked the documents hidden in her bodice, making sure they were secure. "Where should we go first?" "The church. If we can get the townspeople to take shelter there, they'll be safer when the fighting starts." They made their way through the back streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Victor's sentries might spot them. The church was a simple wooden structure with a bell tower that would provide a good vantage point for watching the town. "Father Martinez," Takoda called softly as they approached the building. An elderly priest emerged from the shadows, his face creased with worry. "Takoda, thank God you're here. Strange men have been asking questions about the young woman who arrived on the train." "This is Clara Morgan," Takoda said. "She's the one they're looking for." Father Martinez studied Clara's face carefully. "Morgan, as in the railroad family. You knew my parents. I knew of them. Your father was a good man who believed in treating all people with dignity. Your mother was a saint who gave generously to help the poor." The priest's expression grew sad. Their deaths were a great loss to everyone who knew them. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Father, I need to ask you something. Did you ever meet a nun named Sister Margaret O'Brien?" The priest's face lit up with recognition. "Margaret. Of course I knew her. She visited our parish several times over the years, always asking about orphan children and families in need." "When was the last time you saw her?" "About 6 months ago. She said she was investigating some irregularities in the territorial government, something about corruption and murder." Father Martinez paused. "She also said she was looking for someone very important to her, a young woman who had been lost for many years." Clara's heart began to race. "Did she say who she was looking for?" "She said she was looking for her niece, a girl named Clara who had been hidden away for her own protection." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Sister Margaret wasn't just the nun who had raised her, she was family. Her mother's sister who had been searching for her for decades. Where is she now? Clara asked urgently. I don't know. She said she was close to finding the evidence she needed to expose a conspiracy, but she was worried about her safety. She left town suddenly saying she had to meet someone in Denver. Before Clara could respond, the church bell began to ring. Not the normal call to evening prayers, but the frantic clanging of an alarm. Through the windows, they could see people running through the streets and the orange glow of fires beginning to burn at the edge of town. The attack's starting, Takoda said grimly. We're too late. Not necessarily. Clara replied, pulling out her sketch pad. Look at this. She showed him the map she'd copied with notes about the timing of the attacks. Victor's men are supposed to hit the settlements in a specific order to make it look like a coordinated Lakota uprising. But if we can disrupt their timing, we might be able to expose the deception. Takoda finished. But how? By making sure the real story gets told. Father Martinez, can you get word to the territorial governor? Tell him that the attacks are being staged by Victor Langley's men, not by the Lakota. I'll try, but the telegraph lines have been cut. And even if I could get a message through, who would believe it? I would, a new voice said from the doorway. They turned to see a middle-aged woman in traveling clothes, her face showing the strain of a long journey, but her eyes bright with determination. She was carrying a worn leather satchel and had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Sister Margaret, Clara breathed. Hello, my dear, the woman said, stepping into the church. I've been looking for you for a very long time. Clara ran to her, and they embraced with the desperate relief of family members who had found each other against all odds. I thought you were in Denver, Clara said. I was. But when I heard that Victor's men were closing in on you, I came as fast as I could. Margaret held Clara at arm's length, studying her face. You look just like your mother. Father Martinez said you were investigating Victor's crimes. I've been investigating them for 15 years. I'm not just a nun, Clara. I'm a federal agent working for the Treasury Department. We've been tracking Victor's network of Confederate sympathizers for over a decade. Clara's world tilted. A federal agent, the church provides excellent cover for an investigator. I've been able to travel freely, ask questions, and gather evidence without arousing suspicion. Margaret's voice grew hard. I've been building a case against Victor Langley that will put him away for the rest of his life. Do you have proof of his crimes? I have testimony from witnesses' financial records and correspondence that proves his guilt beyond any doubt. But I need one more thing to make the case ironclad. What? I need you to sign a statement identifying yourself as Clara Morgan and describing Victor's attempts to steal your inheritance. With your testimony, I can prove that everything he's done has been in pursuit of the Morgan fortune. Clara felt a surge of hope. Then we can stop him. We can try. But first, we need to survive the night. Margaret looked through the church window at the growing chaos outside. Victor's men are better organized than I expected. They're not just staging fake attacks, they're planning to eliminate everyone who might expose their crimes. Including us, especially us. Victor knows that I've been investigating him, and he's figured out that you're the missing Morgan heiress. He can't afford to let either of us live. As if summoned by her words, the church door burst open. Victor Langley stood in the doorway, flanked by 6 armed men. His usual composure was gone, replaced by the desperate fury of a man whose carefully laid plans were collapsing. Sister Margaret, he said, his voice dripping with false civility. How nice to see you again. And Clara, my dear, you've led us quite a chase. Victor Langley. Margaret replied, her voice steady despite the danger. You're under arrest for conspiracy murder and treason against the United States government. Victor laughed bitterly. I'm afraid you're in no position to arrest anyone, sister. In fact, I think you'll find that the situation has changed considerably. What do you mean? I mean that I've been expecting you. Both of you. Victor's smile was cold. You see, I've known about your investigation for months. I've been feeding you information, letting you think you were closing in on me, when actually I was drawing you into a trap. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. You knew we were coming. I knew you'd come to the church. I knew you'd try to warn the townspeople. And I knew that Margaret would try to play the hero. Victor stepped further into the church, his men spreading out to block all exits. What I didn't expect was how much you'd learned about your true identity. That's been a pleasant surprise. You're not going to get away with this, Margaret said. Actually, I am. You see, tonight's attack will be blamed on rogue Lakota warriors who killed a federal agent and an innocent young woman. The territorial government will have no choice but to authorize a full military campaign against the tribes. And you'll supply the weapons for that campaign. I'll supply the weapons, the intelligence, and the political support. By the time the smoke clears, I'll control half the territory. Victor's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. The Morgan fortune will just be a bonus. Clara looked at Takoda, who was tensed for action, then at Margaret, who was reaching slowly for something in her satchel. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't helpless. There's just one problem with your plan, Clara said, stepping forward. What's that? You're assuming we came here alone. Victor frowned. What do you mean? Look around you, Clara said. Listen to the sounds outside. Do you really think what you're hearing is a successful attack? For the first time, Victor seemed to notice that the sounds from outside weren't those of a massacre, but of a battle. There were war cries, gunfire, and the clash of weapons, but also the sound of orders being shouted and men fighting back. The Lakota knew you were coming. Takoda said, his hand moving toward his knife. They've been waiting for you. Impossible. My men are professionals. Your men are walking into a trap. Clara interrupted. Every attack you planned has been anticipated. Instead of finding helpless victims, they're finding armed warriors who know exactly what to expect. Victor's face went pale. You're lying. Am I then? Why do you think the church bell was ringing? It wasn't an alarm, it was a signal. Every person in this town knows that the attack is coming from your men, not from the Lakota. As if to prove her point, the sound of running feet approached the church. But instead of Victor's men, Lakota warriors appeared in the doorway, their weapons drawn and their faces painted for war. Chief Wikasa. Takoda said, relief evident in his voice. An elderly Lakota man stepped forward, his presence commanding respect, even from Victor's armed guards. My son, I see you've found the woman we've been protecting. You know who I am? Clara asked. I know that you're Catherine Morgan's daughter. I know that your parents were good people who treated my people with respect. And I know that this man murdered them for their money. Chief Wikasa's eyes fixed on Victor with undisguised hatred. Your men have been defeated, Langley. The attacks have failed. It's over. Nothing is over. Victor snarled, raising his gun. If I can't have the Morgan fortune, then no one can. The shot echoed through the church. But Victor's aim was spoiled by Margaret, who had thrown herself between the gun and Clara. The bullet took her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the altar. Margaret! Clara cried, rushing to her side. But even as she knelt beside her wounded aunt, Clara could see that the balance of power had shifted. Victor's men were surrounded by Lakota warriors, and the sounds from outside indicated that the staged attack had become a real battle, one that Victor was losing. It's not over. Victor repeated, his voice rising to a scream. I've spent my entire life building this operation. I won't let it end here. It ended the moment you decided to murder innocent people. Clara said, her voice cold with anger. You destroyed my family, but you didn't destroy the truth. And now everyone will know what you really are. As Victor raised his gun again, Clara realized that she was no longer the frightened orphan who had jumped from a freight train. She was Clara Morgan, daughter of murdered parents and heir to a legacy of justice. And she was about to claim her birthright. The standoff in the church stretched taut as a bowstring. Victor kept his gun trained on Clara, while Chief Wikasa's warriors held their weapons ready, waiting for the signal to act. Margaret lay bleeding beside the altar, her face pale but her eyes alert. "You think you've won," Victor said, his voice shaking with rage. "But you don't understand what you're up against. I have allies in the territorial government, the federal bureaucracy, the military. Even if you kill me, they'll continue my work." "Maybe," Clara replied, helping Margaret sit up against the altar. "But without the Morgan fortune, they won't have the resources to succeed. And without you, they won't have the connections to stay hidden." "The Morgan fortune," Victor laughed bitterly. "You still don't understand, do you? I've already claimed your inheritance. The papers you signed at the Silver Dollar were legally binding." Clara smiled. "Were they? Because I remember signing my mother's name, not mine. Catherine Morgan has been dead for 26 years, so her signature can't transfer anything to anyone." Victor's face went white. "You're lying. Check the documents yourself. You'll find that Catherine Morgan's signature matches the handwriting on my mother's will perfectly." Clara's voice grew stronger. "But it doesn't match mine at all." "That's impossible. I watched you sign. You watched me forge my mother's signature. A skill I learned at the orphanage, when I had to write thank you letters to benefactors." Clara stood up, her fear replaced by cold determination. "The inheritance documents are worthless, Victor. You have nothing." Victor's composure finally cracked completely. "Then you'll die for nothing," he screamed, turning his gun toward Clara. But Takoda was already moving. His knife left his hand in a smooth arc, taking Victor in the wrist and causing him to drop his weapon. Before Victor could recover, Chief Wikasa's warriors had disarmed his men and taken them prisoner. "It's over," Takoda said, helping Clara to her feet. "Not quite," Margaret said weakly. "Victor's right about one thing: he has allies who will try to continue his work. We need to make sure they're exposed, too." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been gathering evidence for 15 years. Names, dates, financial records, correspondence. Everything we need to bring down the entire network." Clara took the folder, her hands shaking, as she realized the scope of what her aunt had accomplished. "How many people are involved?" "At least 50 officials at various levels of government, plus an unknown number of mercenaries, arms dealers, and Confederate sympathizers." Margaret's voice was getting weaker. "But with this evidence and your testimony, we can expose them all." "What about Victor?" "He'll be tried for treason, murder, and conspiracy. He'll hang assuming he survives long enough to stand trial." Clara looked at Victor, who was clutching his wounded wrist and glaring at her with undimmed hatred. "What do you mean? He has enemies among his own allies. Men who won't want him talking about their involvement in his crimes." Margaret's eyes were starting to close. "We need to get him into federal custody as soon as possible." "I'll send riders to Denver," Chief Wikasa said. "The territorial governor needs to hear about this immediately. And I'll make sure the story gets to the newspapers," Father Martinez added. "The public needs to know what Victor Langley has done." Clara knelt beside Margaret, taking her aunt's hand. "Why didn't you tell me who you were all those years at the orphanage? Why didn't you say you were my family?" "Because I was afraid Victor would find you if I got too close. I had to maintain my cover, keep investigating, gathering evidence." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "But I was always watching over you, always protecting you. I remember now," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "You used to tell me that family would find me when I needed them most. You knew this day would come. I hoped it would. I prayed that I'd live long enough to see you claim your birthright and get justice for your parents. You did. We stopped Victor, and now his entire network will be exposed. Margaret smiled weakly. Your parents would be proud. You've grown into exactly the kind of woman they hoped you'd become. But even as Clara held her aunt's hand, she could see that Margaret's wound was serious. The bullet had hit an artery, and she was losing blood despite Clara's efforts to stop the bleeding. We need to get her to a doctor, Clara said urgently. Dr. Hamilton is Victor's man. Takoda replied, he can't be trusted. Then we'll have to treat her ourselves. Clara had learned basic medical care at the orphanage where she'd helped Sister Margaret tend to sick children. Now she used those skills to clean and bandage her aunt's wound, working by candlelight, while the sounds of battle continued outside. The fighting's moving away from the town, Chief Wikasa observed. My warriors are driving Victor's men back toward the hills. What about the Mexican raiders? Clara asked. They've been dealt with. When they realized they were fighting real Lakota warriors instead of helpless settlers, they fled back across the border. Clara felt a surge of relief. The immediate danger was over, but she knew the real work was just beginning. Victor's network stretched across the territory, and exposing it would require careful planning and coordination with federal authorities. What happens now? She asked. Now we make sure that Victor's crimes are exposed and that his victims get justice. Margaret said, her voice stronger now that the bleeding had stopped. You're Clara Morgan, heir to one of the largest fortunes in America. You have the resources to fight corruption and build a better future for everyone. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. You're more ready than you know. You've already proven that you have the courage to stand up to evil and the wisdom to know right from wrong. Margaret squeezed Clara's hand. Your parents left you more than money. They left you a legacy of justice and compassion. Use it well. As dawn broke over Broken Ridge, Clara looked out at the town that had become the center of her new life. The immediate battle was over, but the war for justice was just beginning. She was no longer the frightened orphan who had jumped from a freight train. She was Clara Morgan, and she had work to do. But first, she had to make sure that Victor Langley and his co-conspirators would never hurt another innocent person again. The federal marshals arrived in Broken Ridge 3 days after the failed attack, their faces grim with the knowledge of how close the territory had come to all-out war. Clara stood in the temporary courthouse that had been set up in the town hall, watching as Victor Langley was brought in chains before Judge Harrison, who had traveled from Denver specifically to oversee the case. Victor Langley, Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. You stand accused of conspiracy, treason, murder, and the attempted theft of the Morgan Railroad fortune. How do you plead? Victor's lawyer, a nervous man from Denver, who clearly wished he was anywhere else, stood up. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. Very well. Miss Morgan, you may present your evidence. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her parents' legacy and her aunt's sacrifice. She had spent the past 3 days organizing the evidence with Margaret, who was recovering from her wound, but insisted on helping with the case. Your Honor, I have here documented proof of Victor Langley's crimes spanning 26 years. Clara said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Financial records showing his systematic theft of the Morgan fortune, correspondence with Confederate sympathizers, and detailed plans for the fake Indian attacks that would have resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent people. She presented the documents methodically, each piece of evidence building on the last, to create an overwhelming case against Victor. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, federal officials, and newspaper reporters who had come to witness the exposure of one of the largest criminal conspiracies in territorial history. This is all fabricated, Victor's lawyer protested. My client is a respected businessman who has contributed greatly to the development of this territory. Miauk, then explain this, Clara said, producing the forged inheritance documents. These papers purport to transfer the Morgan fortune to your client, but they're signed with my mother's name, a woman who died 26 years ago." Judge Harrison examined the documents carefully. The signature does indeed appear to be that of Catherine Morgan, not Clara Morgan. "Mr. Langley, did you know that these documents were fraudulent when you had them prepared?" Victor's composure finally cracked. "She tricked me. She was supposed to sign her own name, not her mother's. It was a deliberate deception." "So you admit that you intended to steal Miss Morgan's inheritance?" "I admit nothing," Victor snarled. "That money should have been mine by right. I married Catherine Morgan. I built the railroad empire I deserve." "You deserve to hang," Judge Harrison interrupted. "But first, this court will hear the full extent of your crimes." Over the next several hours, witness after witness testified to Victor's illegal activities. Elena Vasquez described how she had seen Victor poison Clara's mother. Peterson detailed Victor's involvement in land fraud and weapons smuggling. Chief Wikasa testified about the attacks on Lakota villages using weapons Victor had provided. But it was Margaret's testimony that sealed Victor's fate. "I have been investigating Victor Langley for 15 years. She said, her voice weak but determined. "I have documented evidence of his connections to 57 corrupt officials, his role in the murder of at least 12 people, and his plan to use the Morgan fortune to fund a Confederate resurgence in the Western Territories." "This is preposterous," Victor's lawyer objected. "My client is not a traitor." "Then explain this," Margaret said, producing a letter written in Victor's own handwriting. This correspondence with Jefferson Davis shows that Victor was planning to use the chaos of an Indian war to establish a Confederate stronghold in Colorado Territory. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. The evidence was overwhelming, and even Victor's lawyer looked defeated. "Your Honor," Clara said, standing to address the court, "Victor Langley murdered my parents, stole my inheritance, and planned to slaughter innocent people for profit. But his crimes go beyond personal gain. He was attempting to destabilize the territorial government and reignite the Civil War." "And what would you have this court do about it?" Judge Harrison asked. "I want him to face justice. Full justice for every life he's taken and every crime he's committed." But even as the trial proceeded, Clara could see that Victor was planning something. His eyes kept flicking toward the windows, and she noticed that several of his men who had been captured during the attack were no longer in custody. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Takoda, who was sitting beside her. "What do you mean?" "Victor's too calm. He should be desperate, but he looks like he's waiting for something." Takoda followed her gaze to the windows, where armed men were visible in the distance. "He's planning an escape attempt, or something worse." As if summoned by her words, the sound of gunfire erupted outside the courthouse. Victor's remaining men were attacking the building, trying to free their leader and eliminate the witnesses who could testify against them. "Everyone down," Judge Harrison shouted, drawing his own weapon. The courtroom erupted into chaos as bullets shattered the windows and people dove for cover. Clara found herself pressed against the floor beside the judge's bench, her heart pounding as she realized that Victor's final gambit was to destroy everyone who could expose his crimes. "The evidence," Margaret called out from across the room. "Protect the evidence." Clara looked toward the table where all the documents were spread out. If Victor's men destroyed the evidence, he might still escape justice. She couldn't let that happen. "Clara, no!" Takoda shouted as she ran toward the table. But Clara was already moving, gathering the crucial documents as bullets whistled past her head. She stuffed the papers into her dress and ran for the back exit, hoping to get the evidence to safety. Victor had broken free from his chains during the chaos, and now he was pursuing her with a gun in his hand. "You think you can destroy everything I've built?" he screamed. "I've spent my entire life creating this empire." "You've spent your entire life destroying innocent people," Clara replied, reaching the back door of the courthouse. But Victor was faster. He grabbed her arm and spun her around, pressing the gun to her temple. Give me the documents, or I'll blow your brains out right here. Even if you kill me, there are copies. Margaret made sure of that. Then I'll kill her too, and everyone else who knows the truth. Clara looked into Victor's eyes and saw the madness of a man who had nothing left to lose. He would kill her, then kill Margaret, then try to escape to continue his crimes elsewhere. "You're insane," she said. "I'm desperate. There's a difference." But as Victor prepared to pull the trigger, Clara remembered something Sister Margaret had taught her years ago. When facing evil child, don't try to fight it on its own terms. Find another way. "Victor," she said suddenly, "before you kill me, I want to know something. Why did you really murder my parents? Was it just for the money?" Victor's grip on the gun loosened slightly. "Your father was a fool who thought he could build a railroad without understanding the realities of frontier business. Your mother was a spoiled heiress who thought money could solve every problem. They believed in justice. They believed in fairy tales. This territory is violent, chaotic, lawless. It needs strong leadership to bring order to the chaos. And you think you're that leader? I know I am. I've proven it by building an empire from nothing, by creating order where there was only wilderness." Clara could see that Victor genuinely believed in his own righteousness. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a fanatic who thought his crimes were justified by his vision of the future. "What about the children who would have died in your attacks? What about the families you've destroyed? Casualties of progress. Sometimes good people have to die so that civilization can advance. That's not civilization, that's barbarism. You're too young to understand. Too idealistic." Victor's voice grew colder. "But you won't have to worry about it much longer." But before Victor could fire, Takoda burst through the back door with Chief Wikasa and a group of Lakota warriors. The distraction was enough for Clara to break free from Victor's grip and dive for cover. "It's over, Langley." Takoda said, his rifle trained on Victor's chest. "Your men are defeated, the evidence is safe, and there's nowhere left to run." "Nothing is over," Victor screamed, turning his gun toward Takoda. "I'll kill all of you before I let you destroy my life's work." The shots came almost simultaneously. Victor's bullet went wide as Takoda's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. But Victor managed to stay on his feet, pulling a knife from his boot as he charged toward Clara. "If I'm going to die, I'm taking you with me," he snarled. Clara had no weapon. No way to defend herself except her own courage and the knowledge that she was fighting for justice. She grabbed a piece of broken wood from the damaged building and swung it at Victor's knife hand, knocking the blade aside. They grappled desperately, Victor's superior strength offset by Clara's younger reflexes and determination. But Clara knew she couldn't hold him off much longer. "This is for my parents," she said, driving her knee into Victor's wounded shoulder. Victor screamed and staggered backward, dropping his knife. Clara grabbed the weapon and pointed it at his chest, her hands shaking with exhaustion and emotion. "Kill me, then," Victor gasped. "Prove that you're just as ruthless as I am." Clara looked at the man who had murdered her parents, stolen her inheritance, and planned to slaughter innocent people. She had every right to kill him, every justification for revenge. But as she raised the knife, she heard Margaret's voice in her memory. "Justice isn't about revenge, child. It's about making sure the innocent are protected and the guilty are punished according to law." No, Clara said, lowering the weapon. "I'm not like you. I believe in justice, not murder." Victor's face twisted with rage. "Then you're a fool just like your parents." "Maybe. But I'm a fool who's going to live to see you hang for your crimes." As federal marshals arrived to take Victor into custody, Clara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The man who had destroyed her family was finally facing justice, and his conspiracy had been exposed for all to see. But the real victory wasn't just Victor's defeat. It was the knowledge that Clara had found her true identity and her place in the world. She was Clara Morgan, daughter of good people, who had believed in justice and compassion. And she was going to use her inheritance to continue their work. The battle was over, but the war for a better future was just beginning. The trials that followed Victor's capture would be remembered as the largest criminal prosecution in territorial history. Over the course of 3 months, 57 officials were arrested, 34 were convicted, and the entire power structure of the territory was rebuilt from the ground up. Clara sat in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching as the last of Victor's co-conspirators was sentenced to prison. The man who had once seemed so powerful now looked old and broken, his empire of corruption destroyed by the truth he had tried so hard to hide. "How does it feel?" Margaret asked, her arm still in a sling from her wound, but her eyes bright with satisfaction. "Like justice," Clara replied. "Finally. Your parents would be proud. You've accomplished something they could only dream of." Clara touched the locket at her throat, thinking of the parents she had never known, but who had shaped her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. "I had help. I couldn't have done this alone. None of us could have. But you were the one who chose to fight instead of running away. That took courage. It took desperation. I didn't have anywhere else to go. You had everywhere else to go. You could have taken the money and disappeared. Instead, you chose to stay and fight for people you barely knew." Clara looked around the courtroom where many of the people whose lives had been saved by the exposure of Victor's conspiracy were sitting. Farmers who had almost lost their land, settlers who had been targets of the fake attacks, and Lakota families who had been facing the prospect of genocide. "They weren't strangers," Clara said. "They were my neighbors, my community. And now they're your responsibility. The Morgan fortune comes with obligations as well as privileges." Clara had been thinking about that responsibility for months. $3 million was more money than she could spend in a lifetime. But it was also a tool that could be used to build the kind of future her parents had envisioned. "I've been talking to Takoda about that," she said. "We have some ideas. Such as a settlement where people of all backgrounds can live together in peace. A place where the mistakes of the past don't have to be repeated." Margaret smiled. "Your parents would like that. They always believed that diversity was strength, not weakness. It won't be easy. There's still a lot of prejudice and hatred in this territory. But there's also a lot of hope. And now there's justice. That's more than we had 6 months ago." Clara nodded, thinking of how much had changed since she jumped from that freight train. She was no longer the frightened orphan who had been running from an uncertain future. She was Clara Morgan, a woman who had found her identity, her family, and her purpose in life. "There's something else," Margaret said, reaching into her bag. "I have a letter for you. It arrived this morning." Clara took the envelope, noting the careful handwriting and the Boston postmark. Inside was a letter from someone named Clara Beaumont, who identified herself as a teacher at a school for orphaned girls. "Dear Miss Morgan," the letter began, "I have been following your story in the newspapers with great interest. Your courage in exposing the conspiracy against your family has inspired many people, including myself. I am writing to you because I believe we may be related. I was raised at St. Catherine's Orphanage in Boston, and I have reason to believe that my real name is Clara Morgan. If you are willing, I would very much like to meet you and learn more about our family's history." Clara's hands shook as she read the letter. "Margaret, is this possible? Could I have a sister?" "It's possible. Victor mentioned that your mother was pregnant when she died, but I assumed the baby didn't survive. If she did..." Margaret's voice trailed off as she studied the letter more carefully. The dates would match. If Catherine was carrying a child when Victor poisoned her, and if someone managed to save the baby, you think it's really her. I think it's worth investigating. The letter mentions details about St. Catherine's that only someone who lived there would know. And the handwriting. Margaret paused. It reminds me of your mother's. Clara felt tears building in her eyes. The possibility that she might have family beyond Margaret was almost too wonderful to believe. What should I do? Write back to her. Invite her to come to Colorado. If she's really your sister, she deserves to know the truth about your family. And if she's not, then you'll have helped another orphan find her way in the world. That's not such a bad thing. Clara folded the letter carefully, thinking about the sister she might have, and the reunion that could heal wounds that had festered for decades. I'll write to her tonight. Good. But first, there's something else we need to discuss. The Morgan Railroad fortune has been fully restored to you, but there are decisions that need to be made about how to use it. What kind of decisions? The railroad company, the mining operations, the real estate holdings, they all need management. You could hire people to run them, or you could sell them and invest the money elsewhere. Clara had been dreading this conversation. She knew nothing about business, and the idea of managing such vast holdings was intimidating. What would my parents have wanted? They would have wanted you to use the money to make the world a better place. How you do that is up to you. I know what I want to do. I want to build something new, something that honors their memory, and helps heal the wounds that people like Victor have created. Tell me. Clara pulled out her sketch pad where she'd been drawing plans for months. A settlement in the Colorado Territory, where people of all backgrounds can live together as equals. Not a reservation or a segregated community, but a real town where Lakota and white families can work together, learn from each other, and build a future for their children. Margaret studied the sketches, her expression growing more excited as she understood the scope of Clara's vision. This is ambitious. It would require massive investment, careful planning, and cooperation from both communities. I know, but I think it's possible. Takoda and Chief Wicasa are willing to help, and I've been talking to some of the white families who were saved during Victor's attack. They're grateful enough to consider trying something new. What about the territorial government? They might not approve of such an experiment. The territorial government owes me a debt. Without my testimony, they never would have exposed the corruption in their own ranks. I think they'll be willing to give us a chance. Margaret smiled. Your parents would be proud. This is exactly the kind of project they would have supported. Then you think I should do it? I think you should follow your heart. You've already proven that you have the courage to stand up for what's right. Now you have the resources to make a real difference. Clara looked at her sketches one more time, then closed the pad. Then that's what I'll do. I'll build a place where people can live together in peace, where the mistakes of the past don't have to be repeated. And I'll help you. I may be getting older, but I still have some fight left in me. What about your work with the Treasury Department? I think I've done enough investigating for one lifetime. It's time to start building instead of just exposing corruption. Clara hugged her aunt, feeling the warmth of family and the excitement of a new beginning. Thank you, Margaret. For everything. No, thank you, Clara. For giving me the chance to see justice done and for proving that good people can still win in this world. As they left the courthouse, Clara looked back at the building where Victor's conspiracy had finally been exposed. It had taken 26 years, but justice had finally been served. Now it was time to build a better future. 1 year later, Haven Valley spread across 500 acres of the most beautiful land in Colorado Territory, nestled between rolling hills and a river that ran clear and cold from the mountain springs. The settlement that Clara had built with her reclaimed fortune was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. The main street was lined with businesses owned by both Lakota and white families, a general store run by Peterson, and a Lakota trader named Swift Bear. A medical clinic where Dr. Hamilton worked alongside a traditional Lakota healer, and a school where children learned in both English and Lakota. Clara stood on the porch of the house she shared with Takoda, watching the sun set over the mountains while their infant daughter slept in her arms. They had married 6 months earlier in a ceremony that combined Christian and Lakota traditions, with Chief Wikasa officiating and Margaret giving the bride away. Any word from the territorial legislature? Takoda asked, joining her on the porch. They've approved our petition for official township status. Haven Valley will be recognized as a municipality next month. And the railroad? The Denver Pacific wants to build a spur line to connect us to the main route. It'll bring more settlers, but also more opportunities for trade and commerce. Takoda nodded, but Clara could see the concern in his eyes. Are you worried about how growth will affect the community? I'm worried about whether we can maintain our values as we get bigger. It's easy to live in harmony when everyone knows each other. It's harder when strangers start arriving. We'll figure it out. We always have. Clara looked out over the settlement where the evening cooking fires were beginning to flicker in the growing darkness. The sound of children playing carried on the night air, and she could see families gathering for dinner, some in traditional Lakota lodges, others in frame houses, all living together in the peace her parents had dreamed of. There's something else, Takoda said, pulling a letter from his pocket. This arrived on the afternoon stage. Clara recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Catherine, the young woman who had written to her months earlier, claiming to be her sister. They had been corresponding regularly, and Clara had invited her to visit Haven Valley. She's coming, Clara said, scanning the letter quickly. She'll be here next week. Are you ready to meet her? I think so. Margaret's been helping me prepare, telling me stories about our mother that I can share with Catherine. What if she's not really your sister? Then I'll have helped another orphan find a home. But I think she is. Her letters. There's something about the way she writes that reminds me of myself. Clara folded the letter carefully, thinking about the sister she had never known existed and the reunion that could heal the last wound from her painful past. She says she's bringing something that belonged to our mother. Something she's been saving for years. What kind of something? She didn't say. But she wrote that it would prove once and for all that we're family. As if summoned by their conversation, Margaret appeared on the path leading to their house. At 72, she was still spry and active, throwing herself into the work of building Haven Valley with the same energy she had once devoted to investigating corruption. Clara, she called out, slightly out of breath, I have news. What kind of news? The kind that changes everything. Margaret climbed the porch steps, her eyes bright with excitement. I've been doing some research into Catherine's background, trying to verify her story before she arrives. And she's definitely your sister. I found records of her birth in San Francisco, and more importantly, I found out how she survived. Clara felt her heart racing. Tell me, the night your mother died, there were actually 2 babies in the house. You were about 6 months old and Catherine was just born. When I came to rescue you, I thought I was only saving one child. But someone else saved Catherine, your mother's doctor. He was one of the few people who suspected what Victor was really doing, and he managed to get Catherine out of the house before Victor could kill her. He arranged for her to be taken to Boston, just like you were. So we were both saved, but by different people. Exactly. And neither of you knew about the other until now. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She's really my sister. She's really your sister. And more than that, she's been looking for you for years. She became a teacher because she wanted to help other orphans, but she never stopped hoping that she might find her family someday. When she reads about me in the newspapers, she realized that Clara Morgan might be the sister she'd been searching for. That's why she wrote to you. Clara looked at the letter in her hands, then at her sleeping daughter. She's going to have a niece to meet too, and an aunt who's been waiting 70 years to have a complete family again. As they talked, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the main road. A small carriage was coming up the valley, its occupants silhouetted against the twilight sky. That's impossible, Clara said. Catherine's letter said she wouldn't arrive until next week. Maybe she decided to come early, Margaret suggested. But as the carriage drew closer, Clara could see that it held more than one passenger. There were at least 3 people inside, and they were traveling with more luggage than a single woman would need for a visit. Takoda. Clara said, a note of concern in her voice. Get the rifle. Why, it's probably just travelers looking for a place to stay. Maybe. But after everything we've been through, I don't want to take any chances. The carriage pulled up in front of their house, and Clara could see the passengers clearly for the first time. There were 3 women, all in their 20s or 30s, all with the same auburn hair and green eyes that Clara saw in her own mirror. Dear God, Margaret whispered. It's not possible. The first woman to step out of the carriage was clearly Catherine. Her letters had included a photograph, and Clara recognized her immediately. But the other 2 women were strangers, though they shared the same familiar features. Clara. Catherine called out, her voice shaking with emotion. Is that really you? Clara handed her baby to Takoda and walked down to meet the carriage. Catherine. But who are these other women? They're why I came early. Catherine replied, tears streaming down her face. Clara, I'd like you to meet Sarah and Elizabeth. They're our sisters. The world seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. Sisters. But Margaret said there were only 2 of us. That's what I thought too. But when I started investigating our family history, I found records of other children. Victor didn't just murder our parents, he scattered their children across the country, trying to eliminate all traces of the Morgan family. Clara stared at the 3 women who were looking at her with expressions of hope and recognition. How many of us are there? 4, as far as I can tell. We've been searching for you for months, following every lead, every newspaper story about the Morgan heiress who exposed the conspiracy. And now we're all together. Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. After 26 years, the Morgan sisters are finally home. Clara looked at Margaret, who was staring at the reunion with tears in her eyes. Did you know about this? I suspected there might be others, but I never imagined. Margaret's voice trailed off as she studied the faces of the 4 women. You all look so much like Catherine. It's like seeing my sister again. There's something else, Elizabeth said, reaching into her bag. Something we've been keeping safe, waiting for the day when we could all be together. She pulled out a small wooden box, ornately carved with Celtic designs. This belonged to our mother. She made it during her final illness when she knew she was dying. Clara opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were 4 small gold rings, each inscribed with a name: Clara, Catherine, Sarah, and Elizabeth. She made these for us, Catherine explained. 1 for each of her daughters. She wanted us to have something to remember her by, and something to help us find each other when the time was right. Clara slipped the ring marked with her name onto her finger, feeling the connection to her mother and her sisters that she had never dared to hope for. She knew we'd find each other. She believed in the power of family, Sarah added. She believed that love was stronger than hatred, that truth was stronger than lies. She was right, Clara said, looking at the sisters she had never known existed. She was right about everything. As the sun set over Haven Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, Clara stood with her sisters, her aunt, her husband, and her daughter, surrounded by the community she had built from the ashes of her parents' dreams. The Morgan family was finally complete, and their legacy of justice and compassion would continue for generations to come. What happens now? Elizabeth asked. Now we build the future our parents dreamed of, Clara replied. Together. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Clara Morgan, daughter of murdered parents, heir to a stolen fortune, and founder of a new kind of community, knew that her story was just beginning. The girl who had jumped from a freight train had found her way home, and she had brought her family with her.